Welcome to Your Yes-Filled Life. I'm your host, Brenda Winkle, educator, healer, speaker, guide, and fierce advocate for your yes. I help sensitive and successful men and women find, reclaim, and live from their full embodied yes. Through empowering you to understand your energetic hygiene, establish healthy boundaries, and heal your nervous system, you'll be able to create your yes-filled life and move through your days with more freedom, more ease, and more joy. You'll hear inspiring stories of people who found their full-bodied yes, thought leaders who pursued their own dreams and are living life on their terms, and learn new ways to find the courage, joy, ease, and freedom to more fully step into your yes-filled life. Say no to the good so you can say yes to the great. Join me on this journey to discover your yes-filled life. Whether you're looking to break free from the golden handcuffs, start a new business, find your dream job, or simply live with more intention and mindfulness, I've got you covered. Let's explore the possibilities together and make your dreams a reality. Ready? Let's do this. Let's get you to your yes-filled life. Hello, and welcome back to Your Yes-Filled Life. I'm your host, Brenda Winkle. I am just returning from New York City, where I've spent the last week at a Media Genius Retreat hosted by Adela Hussein and Frenchie Ferenzi. Now, you have already met Adela on the podcast, and Adela is a media strategist and business coach. She and Frenchie put together this incredible event in New York City on the Upper East Side in a beautiful apartment. And we had two speakers, Laura Belgray and Chantel Adams. Laura's book, Tough Titties, is coming out on Tuesday this week. And oh my gosh, you are in for such a treat with her. We were also able to meet with four world-class journalists, Josie Cox, Claire Atkinson, Margie Conklin, and Susie Walker, in addition to getting to meet and become friends with several other entrepreneurs, founders, and CEOs. And you are going to be able to meet some of these incredible women on the podcast in the coming weeks and months. But first, I just want to talk to you briefly before we dive into our episode with Caitlin about something that is near and dear to my heart. I went to this Media Genius retreat in New York City because I knew that I needed to dial in my messaging, because I know that the work that I do is truly transformational in the world. And I also know that my message has only been partially landing. Well, as luck would have it, the Media Genius came through, and I now have a very dialed in message about the work that I do in the world. And that is this: I am an energy healer for high performers. I help support you in being able to discern what's yours and what's theirs. I help you create and set the boundaried yes. And I help increase your capacity for a yes-filled life. There are two ways that you can work with me. My one-on-one offer is called Heal to the Yes. And you can learn more about that by clicking the link in the show notes or go to brendawinkle.com/healing. And my group offer for high performers is called Yes Academy. And in this community of other performers and CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs, you are going to meet some of the most incredible people in the world who are all striving to increase their capacity for yes-filled life, as well as improving and increasing their capacity for success and achievement while creating lives of balance, ease, and fulfillment. For that, you can go to brendawinkle.com/yes-academy-course to learn about that group coaching offer. I also want to make you aware of something really important, which is this: summer solstice is coming up. Summer solstice is on June 21st. It's always on June 21st. And this particular June 21st, it happens to be a Wednesday. The energy around summer solstice is one of new beginnings, new chapters, and it's a beautiful opportunity to really set the intention for what you would like to bring into your experience in the next 12 months. This is so impactful and such a huge energetic portal that the ancients knew and created their temples, their artifacts, and a lot of their lives around this special day. There's something so special about it that people know intuitively and have known for thousands of years about this beautiful time where you can call in the new. I invite you to join me in a transformational breathwork session on Wednesday, June 21st at 9 a.m. Pacific time. I'm going to put the link to save your spot in the show notes, or you can go to brendawinkle.com/breathwork to find out more and to save your spot at this summer solstice breathwork. Caitlin Nochajski is certified as a Mind Rebel coach and also holds 2 master's degrees in social work and business administration from the University of Buffalo. She is a unique voice in the social enterprise world and feels passionately that when we create businesses where both profit and social impact are maximized, we can change the world. Caitlin lives in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, with her high school sweetheart and their 3 uniquely wonderful children. Caitlin's core values are connection, space, vitality, justice, and truth. She loves helping women see their potential, spending time with her people, walking in nature, and cozy moments with coffee and a warm blanket. Caitlin is the co-host of the Not Tonight Project, and I was a guest on their podcast, the Not Tonight Project, not too long ago, and I put the link to that in the show notes. Let's dive into this beautiful and important conversation with Caitlin. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm really good. Happy to be here with you.
Thank you for joining me on the podcast. I am
Yeah.
so excited for this conversation and because well, I love the work that you're doing in the world and I'm
Mm,
fascinated by your podcast title.
mm.
And so I really want to just dive in. Could you tell our listeners a little about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Caitlin Nochajski. I am the CEO and founder of Collective Rise Ventures. And we're a women's empowerment company. And essentially it's kind of an umbrella organization that we have different projects that we support that but the gist is all about doing inner work, inner growth for women, and yeah, finding your true self is kind of
Mm.
the thread that goes through all of our projects.
Perfect. That sounds like our work. Well, and this is why I asked you to be on the podcast, is because our work just fits hand in glove.
Yes, I know. I've been following you as well, and everything that you're doing. I'm just like, oh, it's so related.
So, how, like, everyone has this origin story of a reason that they were inspired to create something like you've created in your company. And I'm just curious if you'd be interested in sharing a little bit about the why.
Sure. That's actually, you're actually the first person I'm telling this version of my why to, because I just recently realized that it actually goes back further than I even was consciously aware of. Um,
Mm.
so going back to childhood, I grew up in a loving family, but also a very family with mental illness within my parents. My father um, suffers from narcissism. There was abuse. There was extreme poverty. There was manipulation tactics. And um, my parents are no longer married, but they were for 32 years. And it was a patriarchal marriage. It was my father was in charge, and my mom spent 32 years um essentially just bending to his will, serving him, even though it was unhealthy. And I saw my mom kind of be at this place where she was stuck. She couldn't get out. There's 5 of us, and like I said, there was a lot of poverty. So the mobility that she had in her life to kind of get out of her situation was really low.
Mhm.
She was like, "Well, I can't, she didn't have a career. She stayed home with us. So she did go back to work sometimes, but they're always minimum wage jobs. And, with 5 kids, how much does that move the needle?
Mhm.
Um, and then so she stayed with my father in a really unhealthy marriage until we were all grown. I was almost 30 by the time they got divorced. And yes, it was through a therapist recently that we were talking about this origin story, and I was like, "Oh my gosh." Seeing my mom in a position where she was stuck and unable to get out of it for so many years just gave me this desire to like create a space for women to empower themselves, really.
Mhm.
And to, yeah, not be stuck by the or limited by the situation. And so women's empowerment has always been just like a call to my heart. There's another kind of later in life origin story that's the one I typically talk about. I was a social worker when I was younger, and I went and got my MSW, and I had so many great internships and jobs and experiences working with um, in a lot of different organizations, and social workers very female led
Mhm.
industry. In my graduate school program there was only a few men, and then fortunately the university that I went to, University of Buffalo, had these, they called dual degree programs, where you could combine kind of two different master's degrees, and there were two-year degrees that you could accomplish in 3 years. So while I was getting my MSW, I also decided to get my MBA, which is a
Mm.
highly masculine
Mhm.
industry, and almost most people in that graduate program and the jobs that I worked in there were male.
Mhm.
And um, I started seeing some things that the men that I worked with often felt like they had this like, what's the word? Just a they can do anything.
Mhm.
Kind of a They were just like, yeah, I'm good enough. I'm here. Like, I not that they're owed it, but like there wasn't these self-imposed limits that I
Yes.
saw. Whereas the women that I was working with more on the social side of the sphere, they were doing such brilliant women doing incredible social change work in the world, and yet they were like undervaluing their
Mhm.
potential.
Mhm.
And I was like, what is this? Like, why are these men thinking that they can do almost anything, and then these women were undervaluing themselves? And I kind of came to the conclusion over the years that like, oh my gosh, it's the messaging that they've
Mhm.
received, that the men have received this messaging that the world is their oyster. And then
Yes.
on the other end of the spectrum, women were like, kind of our training is almost stay small, stay in your lane, don't be too much, don't be too big, don't be too
Mhm.
loud. And also, to just go a little bit further into that, I also, through my MBA program, was fortunate to have an eye and a window, whether it was an internship or going to visit their organization, and also some men that I worked for. And this is let me clarify, I love men, and this is nothing against men, but sometimes these men that were leading this organization, I just thought, oh my gosh, if you're going to be the CEO of an organization, you have this skill set or this mentality or this ability that I don't have, certainly. And then I got in there and I was like, this is how it's running behind the scenes. Like, oh, I could do that, like, oh my gosh, it was a story that I had told myself that they had something that I didn't. And then when I went in, I saw that wasn't true.
Mhm.
And one boss in particular I will talk about, and while he was a nice man, he was the CEO. His father had made a fortune, and then he did. And he oh, what's the kind word to put it? He wasn't good at his job,
Mhm.
at all. He was a kind man, but he wasn't a great leader. He wasn't a good CEO. He wasn't good financially. He wasn't good at any of that. But he had the story that he was meant to be there. And
Right.
he was. And it just like burned me up that I was working with all these women that were just like had so much skill, so much potential, so much everything, and they were just sitting there trying to stay small, where these men got these other messages, and maybe they have less of a skill set or
Mhm.
an interpersonal abilities to work with people, and yet they had risen to the top. So it just kind of lit me up, and I was like, this is unfair. And I kind of want to live my life and letting women know what they're capable of, and eliminating those stories and messaging that women have been told, and yeah, kind of evening that balance out so that we all know that we have the potential to live the lives that we desire.
Oh, I love this. And a couple things really stand out to me. One is back in your first story of origin, how
Mhm.
your mom stayed in this marriage for 32 years. And I'm certain, without even having had this conversation with you before this conversation, I'm certain that the story she was telling herself was, I need to stay in this marriage because of the kids. I'm
Yes.
sure that that's true, because especially the time and the generation and what was available to women at that time, I'm sure that that's how she felt. And I hear people say that now, I need to stay in the marriage for the kids. And you know, I think that that argument probably has expired,
Mm.
because if there's fighting in the home, if there's narcissism, if there's abuse, if there's any kind of unease, it affects the kids.
Yes.
And I heard you say that as you were weaving in your story, is that that tension that was constantly present really affected you. And I almost heard sort of a, like a relief. And I mean, let's be clear, divorce is painful.
Hmm.
And I don't want to sugarcoat that or pretend that that's not true. It's painful. And there was a life after.
Hmm.
And so that really stood out to me. And the second thing that really stood out to me is in your second story of origin, how you were talking about the messaging that women get about not being as capable, not being as brilliant, not being as well suited for leadership, and the men maybe not having the equal skills or training, have this idea that they're well suited for it. And you know what? There's research to back this. It
Mm.
starts as early as third grade.
Mm.
8 and 9-year-old kids. You can see it in the classroom. I was there for 26 years, and you
Oh,
could
wow.
see it in second grade. The girls are speaking out equally to the boys.
Mm.
They're, throwing in ideas, they're being brave, they're raising their hands, they're sharing different things, and they're kind of just running neck and neck with the boys. And then something happens, and I don't know what. I'd be curious if any of our listeners, or if you might be able to speak to what, but in third grade that shifts, and there becomes a reluctance to raise hands. There becomes a reluctance to show up and be wrong. Like, God forbid you make a mistake. And I think that fear of making a mistake carries into adulthood for a lot of women.
Oh, yes.
And it keeps us from even trying for the roles that we might dream about,
Hmm.
because we're scared that we won't look competent. When the
Hmm.
reality is, a lot of women, because of the gender bias that's present in so many cultures, probably have more skills and more ability, but they're not
Hmm.
showing up in the same way. Is that kind of what you see too?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And there's not one reason for it, why it exists. I mean, there's, traumas, whether those are inherited, cultural, or personally experienced traumas that kind of, I know you know all about this, that, get your central nervous system off balance so you feel physically unsafe to step into that. There's also just messaging from so many areas from our birth, and I wonder if
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's like that third, fourth grade time where it starts clicking. And but it's still, I think I've heard a lot of people say that women, I don't feel like, are oppressed anymore. And I know oppressed is kind of a big word, but um so we could say, well, we're equal now, and a lot of people also say, like, well, I know that maybe the pay gaps there a little bit still, what is it, 70 or 80 cents on the dollar, but besides that, I think we've pretty much gotten there, you
Besides
know
that, yeah.
besides that little thing, which our equal work is paid for under value, but it's so much bigger than that. So, I mean, that's one piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if you think about things like, um, we still never had a female president. 95% of Fortune 500 CEOs are still men. And the one that I always talk about that kills me the most, and this is why I've kind of gone into like the investment route, is that 98% of venture capital funds, meaning funding for new ventures and businesses, goes to men still. And this is a 2022 statistic, so last year.
Wait, roll that back. 98% of venture capital goes to men?
Yes, and this is in the United States. And 2% is going to women. And that statistic is not that widely talked about. And I'm like, hello, everybody. Like, do you not see? And venture capital is really almost like where the power is, because that's investments to get these businesses off the ground where you can really create wealth and wealth and power. And so that power imbalance in our culture is very alive and well, not like a little bit, like people think, oh, we're kind of there, because women do have so many more opportunities than they used to, but it's 98-2. Can you believe it?
No, I actually can't. And so I just want to make sure that for a listener that's like, okay, I've heard of venture capitalists. It's a big word. It's on CNN, but I don't know what it means. Can you break it down?
Yeah, so venture capitalism is essentially like people that invest into new ventures, new businesses, giving funding to get things off the ground. So yeah, they would, and then they either it's in exchange for either, their money back plus interest that the company has earned, or even a percentage of the ownership of the company. Yeah, when you talk about venture capital funds, that's where like a lot of yeah, like wealth again, like you can, because when you own a business or you're an entrepreneur, or, you can, it's also risk. There's risk involved in that. But when you get these funders, it kind of takes out the risk, less, so they have less risk that they can go into this with. And then a higher ceiling than if you were just going to have, an hourly wage, which is, it's that ceiling that is such a big, that we talk about, that glass ceiling for women. It's still there. A lot of people think it's gone, because of course you can be one of the women that has broken through, and that is the CEO, or that's really gained wealth and all the stuff that comes along with it. But it's so uneven still. It's drastically uneven between men and women, and they're getting the funding, they're gaining the wealth, they're having to take less risk to pursue their dreams because they're having other people funding them. It's really inequitable.
Yes. And so what we're really talking about is the ability to become an entrepreneur and to make your own fortune. So if the venture capitalism is skewed 98-2, that says that there's tremendous opportunity missed for women. And so this is a gap that you fill. Is that correct?
Yes, we are just a startup company, so it's not like, I won't say we're like rolling in this and can just, invest in all these people, it's little by little.
Right.
But that's where we're headed. And I also, a big inspiration of mine in life is Melinda French Gates. People are familiar with her and who she is and the work that she's done in the world, but one of the pivotal books for me in my life was Moment of Lift by Melinda French Gates. And that talks about, it essentially lays out the argument for why empowering women empowers us all. Because, I mean, it's a whole book, and it's a wonderful book. I'd recommend it to anyone. But the gist is, women, when they are in positions of wealth and power, what do they do with it? They lift others. And I remember in the book, she says, one of my greatest missed opportunities in life is investing more in women, because there's so much potential. The women, I just see I see women with potential everywhere around me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like these women are incredible. There's so much potential in them. But because of whether it's funding or home life obligations and, carrying more of the childcare burdens or, whatever, home life, there's still statistics that even with women working now, often full time, they still carry a lot of the
Hmm.
bigger mental and emotional labor of, taking care of a home, taking care of a family, things like that. And plus the messaging.
Hmm.
It's just like it's so my what I just love to do in life and my what I want to do with my life essentially is help women like close that gap and help work with things that um so that they can achieve their potential, not despite, all these life circumstances that are around keeping us down. It's hard. It's not easy.
Right.
And a way that I love to do that is by that's collective rise is by bringing women together. And because I just know we're so much stronger together
Hmm.
than when we're all
Hmm.
working individual silos. Like that's another thing that like is harming women. Like if we can get together and do this and kind of rise together, like the potentiality for all that, oh, it's beautiful. It's
It
huge.
is beautiful. So it's 9:30 in the morning almost, where as we're recording right now. And I've had two conversations today before our recording started with CEOs, female CEOs, that had to change their schedules for major events because of family obligations,
Mm-hmm.
just to illustrate your point. And these are two highly successful CEOs of female led and owned companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're saying really hits for me. And if there's a listener out there that's wondering, am I doing it right? Why am I feeling this way? Is it something I'm doing wrong? I just want to say, no, this is the structure and the systems that are currently in place, and you're doing it right. You're doing everything right.
Oh, I love that you said that because this is another message that we get. Is there something wrong with me? Why can't I just push harder, try harder? Oh, these other people can do this. Why can't I? There's something wrong with me. And I no, that is not true. There is nothing wrong with you. The culture and structure that we live in is hard. We're getting all the wrong messaging, and you are doing it right. You are. And yes, I always recommend people like getting support in whatever that looks like for you, whether that's coaching or therapy or something like that, because to 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 rise above the cultural muck that we're
Hmm.
stuck in, it's not something that we can do on our own. It's not something that we can just try harder, and overcome. That is like another lie of the patriarchy in a way that,
Hmm.
and then we're just burnt out all the time and
Right.
exhausted.
You're just
If
not
we just
trying
sit
hard
here.
enough. You're just,
Exactly.
you're sleeping 8 hours a day. I mean, how lazy, right? That's kind of the
Right.
message, is like, if you
Yes.
just would you do more in your day, you could get all this done. And the reality is the mental load, like the
Mm,
cognitive load that being a parent plays, especially on women. And we don't talk about that very often, but there is a cognitive load that actually takes bandwidth, time, and energy, even if you don't have it scheduled. And then we talk about the actual physical burden load, where so much of parenting falls to women, whether it means arranging for childcare, arranging for transportation, arranging for activities. That's another level. And then we talk about the physical day to day, like getting the meals, getting the clothes, getting the kids dressed. Maybe they're running naked through the house. And you're like, why am I not doing this right? Well, trust me, you're doing it right. And we've all, if you've been a parent, you've experienced the kid who will not dress in a way that is appropriate for school
mhm,
on a
mhm,
given day.
mhm.
So I'm just
Exactly.
wondering, Caitlin, if you could give like one or two pieces of idea, I guess one or two strategies that
Mm,
someone might be able to implement to feel a little better, or a strategy to sort of get a leg up, what would you suggest?
mm. Wow, that's a great question. Well, there's so many kind of things to do. I think, you know, part of what we talk about is just, first of all, waking up to the culture that we live in and the influences that are impacting you. And again, that's not an easy step. That's kind of a big step, but just at the very core, why what I want people to wake up to is that they are enough
Mhm.
today, as
Yes.
they are today. Like whatever you're doing is enough, and you are whole. There's my coach training is through an organization called the Mind Rebel Academy, and one of the founding principles that we work on is that you are whole, capable, resourceful, and creative, and so is everybody else.
Mhm.
So leaning into that, knowing that right now, whatever, even if what you did today is lay in your bed and you got absolutely nothing accomplished, that's enough. That's actually great because you're taking care of your needs to restore yourself. Like there's nothing wrong
Yes.
with you if you want to like lay in your bed and do nothing. Actually, listening to your body, I think would be my next little one that I would go to and say is
100%.
like checking in with yourself on not, weekly or, monthly, like daily, hourly, actually, is what I would recommend, and being like, "What do I need right now?"
Mhm.
And honor that and not say, "Oh, I need to rest. Oh, I'm so bad or lazy and really I'm just gonna push." Like, no, you need to check in with yourself and trust yourself and nurture yourself. And another practice that I talk about is exquisite self-care. I have conflicting feelings with this message of self-care because it's like, oh, just add another thing to the to-do list. Sounds great. Just go to yoga and meditate as if all day, as if anyone has the time for that. So when I'm talking about it, it's a lot more micro than that. It's getting even nitty grittier and like just taking a second to close your eyes. I like to take a couple breaths, put my hands on my chest and say, what's going on here? What do
Mhm.
I need? And never shaming yourself, because if you're whole, capable, resourceful, and creative, whatever your body's telling you is true and honest and good, and
Exactly.
and nothing's wrong with it. So and when you learn to do this as a lifestyle, and again, I coach on this, I teach on this, I have an organization. It's not like I'm there all the time. I go back to burnout and I try again, but it, it's still a change in a lifestyle and a mindset shift of like, yeah, I'm enough. And when you can do this well, when you learn to practice this, because it's a practice, this is a skill that can be learned, and over practice with practice developed more. um you can get to a place where you can like serve from your overflow, so that
Yes.
when you're not resentful about all these things, not
Mhm.
easy, but it is possible. And you actually end up being more productive in your life. You end up being, your relationships improve. Your messy house, I mean, my house is still messy, don't get me wrong, but it's better than it used to be and less overwhelmed because I've started checking in with myself. And then when I do have overflow, oh, I'm so productive. I can do
Mhm.
the whole house, I can do my business, I can really check in with my partner or my children or whatever, because I have an overflow. But man, is that a hard thing to get to in reality.
Well, and to your point, it's a practice, not a perfect.
Exactly.
There's going to be times when it all really flows well and
Mm,
it
yeah.
aligns and it's all perfectly, it fits into its neat little boxes. And then there's times where you're going to fall way out of balance. And that's why
Mhm,
it's a practice and why you get another opportunity every single day to try again with that check in. And I am drinking the Kool-Aid on what you said about checking in with your body. There's
mhm,
so much wisdom in our bodies. And the more we ignore any kind of sensation or feeling, the more we are ignoring our inner guidance, our inner knowing, and our own intuition. And to your point about knowing, like, if you're in bed all day and you're resting, think about the memes that we see on social media about making fun of like what they call the man cold. Well,
mm,
you know what that is? That is a man saying, I don't feel well. I'm not going to push through it. What
Mm.
if we could permission ourselves to do the same thing? If you're not feeling well, give yourself time and space and grace to rest.
Oh, yes. And I love what you're talking about. I'm so like 100% with you. And one word I want to pick out that you said right there was permission.
Mhm.
We have kind of a triangle that we work with, and the three P's, I call them, the three daily practices, um, is permission, pleasure, and presence. And these are, again, practices, not something that you're going to be perfect at all the time, but it's so many times it's the permission that we're giving ourselves. We might be resentful. Why is my partner sitting on the couch when I'm working or whatever like that? And it's like, you do have the ability to make a different choice for yourself that feels better, but our cultural conditioning, it might not even feel physically safe to do that. No, I can't. And so it's a lot of inner work, like reprogramming your mind so that you can feel comfortable and safe, giving yourself the permission that to do what you actually desire. And I use that word desire, it could be, oh, what desire to do with my life, and if you want to start a business or some other endeavor, whatever you want to do, or the permission what to do in this next 5 minutes with my life. It's a
Mhm.
lot of, what do you desire? I desire to have a drink of water right now because that my body's in need of nourishment. I desire to go pee because I've been, doing so much. I haven't given myself even that permission. So
Exactly.
permission is huge in this journey.
It is. And, we're taught, even for very young children, and we inadvertently teach our kids this, that we are valuable because of our achievements.
Yes.
When we don't recognize the journey and the effort to get to the achievement, we teach and are taught that the only way we matter is if we achieve. And then we
Mhm.
begin to hustle for our worth. And when we
Mm.
start that hustle for our worth, we start to not go to the bathroom when we have to go. We start to not drink water. And then we get to the end of the day and we're exhausted and we don't know why. Or we skip meals, or we just eat packaged foods, or all these things. They're so human. And, I just want to say to the listeners, if you're hearing this and you're like, oh, I see myself in this. Yeah, so did Caitlin and I. And that's why
Yeah.
we're talking about it. It's not something that I think, and Caitlin, you alluded to this, it's not something that you do perfectly all the time. And it's not something I do perfectly all the time either. I can
Mhm.
fall right back into that hustling for my worth if I'm not really careful. And if I'm not resourcing myself. If I'm
Mm.
not fully resourced, I often go into the hustle. And by
Mm.
fully resourced, I mean rested, fed, hydrated, aligned, all the things.
100%. I love what you're talking about here. This is what we do in our organization. We hold each other accountable for this, all the time, because it is hard. It is hard to it's the value thing that you're talking about. Like our messaging is that are, like you said, our values and our productivity, and that our values really tied up with our insides. We don't like to feel in like, oh, we're not valuable, like, oh, that feels really icky inside of us, so we will do anything to avoid feeling that, including just running ourselves into the ground 24/7, and it's no way to live. So
Yeah. So tell us about your podcast, because you have a very cool podcast name.
yes. So my podcast is called the Not Tonight Project. I'm the co-host on Not Tonight Project, and the podcast is Not Tonight Podcast. You can find it on any podcast listening um, platform. And it is a conversation about women, and it's called Bold Conversations About Sex. And we're specifically talk about sex in long-term relationships and marriage, just because we found that gap, people talk about sexuality when it's new and exciting and fun, but often the message about what it takes to maintain a healthy sexual relationship in the long term. Oh my God. If we could go back to messaging, like false messaging that we've received in our society, sexuality for everyone is a lot of false messaging in there, but women especially. And it's again, what we encourage women is to do their inner work in all the areas of our life. And what we're trying to shed light on is including your sexuality. Like
Hmm.
that's often when we talk about inner work, that's not often the area or the sphere that it's talked about. So we try and bring those conversations to light.
Oh, that's amazing. And it makes so much sense to me because, as somebody who does work with energy and chakras, our second chakra, the sacral chakra, is related to creativity and relationships, and often also linked to abundance and prosperity. And that's where all of our sexual organs live. And
Oh,
so, if there's any sort of unease or tension or blockage or just heaviness in the sacral chakra, we find imbalances in the ability to earn money. We find imbalances in creativity, in relationships, in satisfaction across all realms of life. And so it makes so much sense to me that this would be linked to women's empowerment because of course it is. And energy has no walls, as one of my mentors, Sam Skelly, says. Energy has no walls. And so if you're not being authentic to you in your sexuality, then there are other areas that you are also being inauthentic and perhaps people pleasing, saying yes when you really mean no, saying no when you really mean yes, all the things. And so I love that you're doing this.
oh my gosh, you're speaking my language. First of all, chakra work is something that I'm so interested in and I want to learn more about. So I'm going to tune into more of that kind of stuff because I what you're saying about the chakras and how they're all connected, I haven't known that that was like a chakra thing, but I've experienced that in my own personal life, as well as seen it in what we do is tell women's stories. So we just have a woman on and she kind of tells us her sexual journey and from the origin of how she grew up thinking and what messages she received growing up about sex and to where she is today. And I've seen that and so what you're saying is true. And actually, one of the taglines we use for the podcast is the path to healing starts in the bedroom. And
Mm.
at first, when we kind of, I know, when I first said that, I was like, oh, it was actually my partner that said it first, Rachel Walker. And I was like, oh, dumb, wow, that's like really big and profound. The path to healing starts in the bedroom. And I was a little uneasy about it at first, but the more I've dived into this work, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it's true." It's not they're all connected. Like, you can't just have like, "Oh, this is prosperity and abundance and goodness in this one area of your life," and
Right.
then just like this other area that's like, "Oh, just shut it down," or, there's so much shame around sexuality and people avoid it, and people are like, it's an area of their life they don't necessarily wanna dig into and look at because it's a lot. I mean, there's so much. You're talking about shame and worthiness.
Yes.
Diving into sexuality is very, very deep in that area. But just to I'll share a little bit about my own personal journey in this and what brought me to this work. So I've been with my husband for 22 years. We're high school sweethearts. We've been married, I think 13, 14 years coming up on, but together for 22. And pretty classic story in that, early years, good sex. As the years went on, 3 kids, like my desire to have sex, it just totally plummeted. Like it just wasn't there anymore. Um, and so eventually it got us to this point in our marriage. I forget, what, maybe 18 years into our relationship, that it was like, all right, we need help and we need support here. So I went and I got help in that area. But what what that work looked like was so different than kind of what I expected, because people have like low desire, then people kind of think like, "Well, maybe I just don't like sex that much," or
Mhm.
um maybe if it was even the messaging is, well, maybe try this position, or often maybe try some lingerie, spice things up. Oh, I hate the word like spice things up because it can be so triggering for so many women. And the work that actually needed to be done was a deep dive into myself and who I am as a person. It was digging through these cultural messages that were really
Mhm.
damaging, of that a woman's sexuality is almost how it's, and people don't say this outright. It's like a subtle messaging. It's for men.
Yes,
Like,
it's for the male gaze. Absolutely.
yes, exactly. We're not taught as women to consider our own sexuality, our own desires, our own needs. Like, I was many years into, my sexual life, many years before I even, like, if people said, "Well, just do more of what you desire," I would have probably said, "Well, I don't know what that is." Because
Mhm.
I was never kind of taught to think of sexuality in that. It was just serve your husband. Your job, even as a wife, is still the prevalent message that's out in our society. Your job as a wife is to keep, it's a need for a man, and it's our job as a partner or a spouse to fill that need. And that is such a damaging message. I will go to my grave like speaking out against this, because first of all, it's not a need. It is a desire for connection between two people. Sex, when it's at its healthiest form, sex is connection.
Mhm.
And that is the purpose of it. That is um why people have sex, because it creates that. But it needs to be two people connecting in a way that feels good and genuine and authentic to them. What Not just one person giving in to fill the other's need.
Right.
It's
It's mutual.
mutual. Exactly.
Yes.
But what is mutual? A lot of women say, well, I know he knows what he wants, but I don't know what I want. Again, because we haven't been taught to dig into ourselves and ask. And another thing that I like to talk about, and we talk about a lot on the podcast, is um, when we think about sex, we typically think about penetrative sex. That's our classic definition. And it's such a limiting definition of sexuality and in the potential for sexual connection. Something my partner and I are talking about a lot right now is kind of redefining what sexual connection can be and look like. And so, for example, when I was at this point, I had just had my third baby, like my desire for penetrative sex was like non-existent. It just, I had none. And I honestly was at a point where I didn't even have hope that I would ever have that again. But then we started, instead of focusing on how can we get to penetrative sex, we started focusing on how can we connect and which ways
Mhm.
of connection look good and feel good to me. And it started, and then I started thinking of things way outside the sexual spectrum. Like, okay, since I couldn't access what felt good to me in the bedroom, I started thinking, okay, what feels good to me in life? Okay, what's my favorite thing that, oh, if I could do anything, what would I do? Oh, I go to the spa. I mean, everybody loves a spa, right? It's nurturing, it smells good, and there's soft, fuzzy things and blah, blah, blah. So instead, we started focusing, I want this time to connect with my husband, but during it, we might just talk, and we might just lay on this fuzzy blanket, and we might just have a candle that smells good. And when we took away this goal of having just needing to achieve the orgasm, really, to get to penetrative sex to achieve the orgasm,
Mhm.
that was, it changed everything. And
It's another thing where we're hustling. We're trying to
yes,
achieve. And when
yes,
when you can let go of that, then a lot of things become
yes.
possible.
And be in that presence, in that connection. Sometimes it looks like just connecting and talking to my husband for an hour, and letting him know my heart and all the things I'm struggling with. Sometimes it's just cuddling. But once I started allowing myself this permission to connect with him that didn't need to have the end goal of ending in an orgasm or penetrative sex, guess what happened? We started kind of having a lot more penetrative sex and an orgasm. Again, not because it was the goal, but I'm
It's a
not sure if you're,
byproduct. It's a
it's a
byproduct
byproduct.
of
Yeah.
connection and feeling seen and feeling safe and having an actual relationship where there's give and take and mutuality.
Absolutely.
It's so brave
Mm,
to have this podcast and so needed because
thank
I hear this from my clients all the time. I mean,
you.
seriously, I
Really?
hear conversations like, we haven't had sex in 5 years or in 7 years, or I don't know how to do this, or I feel triggered, or I mean, it comes up for people. And I don't identify necessarily as somebody who's an expert, but it comes up for people when we're doing nervous system repair and healing
Mm,
work because, again, energy has no walls. So if there's an imbalance in one part of your life, it impacts other areas.
100%. And going back to my own story, once I, in order to fix our sexuality, I had to go back and get in touch with my needs, learn to trust my intuition, all this kind of work that you're talking about in the other areas, and being able to speak my desires and my needs, all that. Like, it was deep work I needed to do that eventually led. So the actual work to do in my sex life had actually very little to do with the act of sex.
Mm-hmm,
It
mm-hmm,
was all those underneath things, the messaging and the trust in myself, and the knowing that I'm worthy of feeling good in my body, and sharing my truths and my things with my partner, vulnerability, all that. I mean, if you can be vulnerable, that's why I really like talking about sex, because it's just one of the most vulnerable areas of our life. And vulnerability is one of the beautiful ways to create connection with each other. The more
mm-hmm.
vulnerable we are, that's Brene Brown 101. The more vulnerable we are, the more connected we are to those people that we're vulnerable with. So it really just
Absolutely.
became this mechanism. But it wasn't just like, oh, I have to fix just this area. I had to go and fix so many areas of my life, so many areas of our marriage. I mean, that's what led to me really even starting the company, because I was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years before I did this, and I was in deep burnout, and I just resentment. I was like a businesswoman prior to kids, and I had just kind of let that side of myself go completely.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, oh, actually, like, I do have desires for not just the bedroom, but I have desires for what I want my days to look like, the impact I want to make in the world, like what I want my relationships to look like. And it's really the whole picture that, is the work we have to do.
Absolutely. And so one of the things you said is I needed to fix myself and I needed to fix my marriage. And I'm wondering if it was more, instead of fixing, if it was more learning to say yes to your inner desires and your inner nudges.
Mm, yes. Thank you for that catch. That's still like a verbal slip up, that, because you're right. There is nothing to fix. Absolutely. It's more about becoming more of who we are,
Mm,
actually, than
mhm.
fixing anything, and stepping into the fullness of who we are, our authenticity, and that's the journey. Not fixing anything that's wrong with us, stepping more into who we are as
Yeah,
people.
I love that. And I think that that's so true. And I find myself using that word accidentally sometimes too.
Yeah.
And just remembering, oh no, I'm not fixing. I am owning who I am by giving myself full permission to say yes to the things that really matter to me.
Yeah.
So I have just
Absolutely.
5 fun questions as we kind of wrap up today. The
Sure.
first one is, what is in your morning mug?
Oh, just black coffee every day. Hardcore. Love it so
That's
much.
amazing. Is there a song that every time you listen to it, you're like, yes, I can do anything?
Oh my gosh, so many. Let me pick one. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the band the Avett Brothers.
Hmm.
They are okay. They're my. I live in North Carolina, and they live like not too far, so they're from this region, and I'm kind of a groupie, I guess you could say. So there's so many songs of theirs. They're just kind of these soul spiritual teachers for me. But my favoriteest one is Living. Gosh, what's the actual song title now? It's Living of Love. And the whole premise is, some people have this philosophy that I believe that, at all times we're either living in a state of fear or we're living in a state of love. And, it's kind of, the message is like, I'm living kind of a different way. I'm not going to give into the fears. And I don't know what I'm doing in this world, but I know what is happening. It's founded in love for myself and others. And when I get into that like love space for, yeah, others, but even mostly myself, when I truly just love all the pieces of me, that's when I feel like I can do anything.
That's really cool. That's really cool. I love that. Is there a podcast that you love that you listen to?
Oh my gosh, my most favorite podcast in the world is Beautiful Anonymous. I'm not sure if you've heard of that,
I
but
haven't.
it's the comedian Chris Gethard is the host of it, and it's been around for a long time. And I was actually on it years ago. It's the whole premise is um, the it's a 1 hour anonymous conversation with people call in just to be on this show, and it can be about anything in the world. And why I love it so much is it's just a slice of life of all different pieces of humanity all over the world, because listeners call in from all over the world, and they just talk about what they're going through that day, any age group, gender, identity, anything. And it's actually funny enough, so there's two ways you can call in, or they have a voice message that you can like be like, hey, I'd like to be on, this is, in 1 minute my topic. And I called and I said, hey, I work in like the field of women's sexuality, and they called me back and I was on it. And I got that's was probably what's inspired me to start my own podcast, because I listened back, and which was really hard for me. Visibility is like, it's one of my biggest growing edges in the world, and I'm still on that journey. But people are like, oh, you have 2 master's degrees, you're well spoken, all this stuff. But I always, as a woman, I don't know, other people are better than me. Those messages were
Yeah.
playing in my head. And it wasn't until, and it took me, even after the podcast came out, it took several days for me to listen to it, because it was, that's intimidating and scary. And the only way I even was able to listen to it was I told myself, like, just listen to it as I'd listened. I think my episode was number 250 something, and I had listened to every episode. I'm like, just pretend it's not you, and just pretend it's another caller, and just listen to it that way. And I did, and I was like, oh, I'm kind of smart. I kind of know what I'm talking about. Oh, and he actually, it's a 1 hour call. That's the whole premise of the show. And he extended it beyond the 1 hour, because he was so engaged in the conversation and what we were talking about, that I was like, oh my God, he extended the hour. He never extends the hour. So it was really having to almost hear myself from an outer perspective for it to finally click in my head, like, I do have something to say. I'm valuable, like, I'm smart. All that stuff, which is pretty wild, but that was my journey. So
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I bet that's so relatable. So relatable. Who inspires you?
Oh my gosh. So I always say I have these 4 sections of me that so I'll tell you all 4 of them. My little animal people I relate to. Brene Brown is like my most favorite. She's a social worker. I'm a social worker. Like, I love her and the work she does. She inspires me whenever I'm struggling. I have all her books. I just go to them all the time. My second person is Martha Beck. Are you familiar with her?
Yes, yes.
She is a coach that is just such a powerhouse on like trusting yourself and just doing what you want, doing what feels good in your life. And she calls it living in integrity with yourself.
Yes.
And not and actually being like, I want this, okay, I'm gonna do this. I want this, I can do this. So that's so much of the permission based, isn't her? My third one is Melinda French Gates for the women's empowerment that I already talked about. Oh my God. And the fourth one is kind of out of left field, but it's Richard Branson. Because his CEO energy is like what I want my CEO energy to be. He's just like, one of his sayings is, screw it, let's do it. Let's just go out in the world. Who cares? We're so afraid of failing. Let's go fail all the time, and let's just go move forward and live our fullest lives. He's really big into like not being afraid to live a big full life. So he's my other spirit animal, as I call them.
Love that. I love that. My last question is, if you find yourself in a funk, feeling angry, sad, scared, what do you do to flip the switch and access joy?
I get quiet. I quiet down and I look inside, and and that can kind of look different. Sometimes I sit on a meditation pillow inside my closet is my most frequent thing I do. And I sit with that emotion in my body, and I try and get underneath it and say, what's here for me? What's going on? What's causing this? Instead of just living with that emotion in my body, I try and sit with it, and almost the natural thing to do is lean away from it because it feels uncomfortable, but I try and embrace the philosophy of leaning into it and looking at it directly and feeling it, actually feeling those yucky feelings in your body to get through to the other side of the emotion, so that I can, first of all, have a course of action to take so that I don't have that negative emotion living in me. And then, yeah, a lot of times that's accompanied by journaling. And then if nothing else is working, I flip on some music, because that is such a great way to just kind of like shift your energy. I love that.
Absolutely. Caitlin, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so nice to talk to you. I love the work that you're doing in the world. You're amazing. And yeah, I'll talk to you soon.
Oh, thank you. I'm pretty sure I'm your mirror.
Yes, absolutely you are.
You may know that the podcast recently underwent a makeover. And so I reached out to Caitlin and asked her one more question about how she found her yes filled life. Here's her answer.
Hi, Brenda. I wanted to answer your last question. What's the thing that you've done that's been most impactful to your yes filled life? And for me, the answer to this came immediately, and that is I started listening to my body, trusting my body, and using that as like a compass for my decisions. And yes, the big decisions in life, but actually a lot more so those little day to day, minute by minute, hour by hour decisions of how we spend like all the days of our life, and trusting myself ruthlessly, listening to myself when I'm tired, when I'm excited, when I, want to create, whenever I'm able to, trusting my emotions, trusting my feelings, trusting my intuition, and yeah, just following that as ruthlessly as this life allows me to. Thanks, Brenda.
Here are the takeaways. The gendered messages that men and women receive as children are very different. Those identifying as boys or men are told that the world is your oyster and you can do anything. Those identifying as girls and women are told to, quote, stay in your lane, don't be too much, and don't be too loud, end quote. The story you believe has a huge impact on how you perceive your ability to lead and what you're capable of. It's time to change that messaging so that we all know we have the ability to accomplish great things. Number two, the impact of gendered messaging around what one can do shows up as early as third grade. Those identifying as girls will stop raising their hands as often, stop using their voices as much in the classroom at the same rate as those identifying as boys. There isn't one singular reason for this, there are many reasons. Number three, this gender gap impacts our society in very measurable ways. For example, the United States still has never had a woman president. The pay gap remains at women earning 70 to 80 cents on the dollar compared to men, and 95% of Fortune 500 CEOs are men, and 98% of venture capital funds go to men, according to a 2022 statistic. Number four, venture capitalism includes people who invest in new ventures or new businesses. It's funding to get things off the ground. Funds are provided in exchange for a percentage of interest in the company, co ownership, or repayment over time. Because 98% of venture capital funds go to men, this becomes another glass ceiling for women. In a nutshell, venture capital reduces the financial risk. It increases the ability to become an entrepreneur and make your own fortune. Number five, empowering women empowers us all. When women come into their own power and wealth, they lift up other people. Bringing women together results in a collective rise. Number six, quote, try harder and you can overcome, end quote, is a lie that the patriarchy tells us. There is a cognitive load that is often not given credit in our distributed workloads and roles. It's important to give ourselves credit for the things that don't end up in a day planner, like dressing kids or planning meals or outings. There are things that take time, energy, and bandwidth that we are often not given credit for, either by ourselves or by our partners, families, or colleagues. Number 7, waking up to the culture that you live in and the things that influence you is important. You are enough today, just as you are. You are whole, resourceful, and creative, and so is everyone else. There is nothing wrong with you if you decide to rest. Number 8, check in with yourself daily and hourly and honor what you need right now. Many women are taught that sexuality is a need for men and that the woman's role is to fill that need. But sex is a connection and should be a way for two people to connect in a way that is mutual. Number 10, your sexual satisfaction can improve significantly when you reframe the end goal of orgasm and penetrative sex and instead put the focus on communicating and mutuality. When the focus is moved from the goal of penetrative sex and orgasm to connection, the end result might actually become more penetrative sex and more orgasm. I invite you to connect with Caitlin. She's over on Instagram at Collective Rise Ventures, and her website is collective-rise.com. Be sure that you check out the link for the summer solstice breathwork, which will be held on June 21st at 9 a.m. Pacific. Thank you so much for listening to Your Yes Filled Life. If you loved this episode, would you please share it with a friend? And if you haven't yet given the podcast a rating or a review, could you please just take 30 seconds and go leave your 5-star rating or review right now? Because the more 5-star ratings and reviews a podcast has, the more likely it ends up in the feed of someone who really needs it. And I believe that we all deserve to have a yes-filled life. Bye for now. Until next time.